Fred Couples had one of the smoothest swings golf has ever seen. He also had enough speed to hit the ball enormous distances. Those two things should not look like they belong together. Most golfers tense up when they want more power. Couples seemed to do the opposite. His hands stayed soft, his rhythm stayed calm, and at times his right hand barely seemed involved through impact, yet the club head was moving at elite speed. So what exactly was he doing differently? And more importantly, which part of it should ordinary golfers actually copy? Fred Couples became famous for having one of the smoothest, most relaxed-looking swings in professional golf. Watch him from a distance and almost nothing appears violent. The backswing seems unhurried. There is no obvious rush from the top. The transition looks almost lazy compared with players who appear to attack the ball with every muscle they have. Then the club reaches impact and the ball disappears. That contrast became part of the Fred Couples image. A relaxed walk, loose shoulders, almost casual body language. Then a drive traveling distances that seemed completely inconsistent with the amount of effort on display. And that appearance could be misleading, because Couples was not actually swinging slowly. During the later stages of his PGA Tour career, measured driver speeds could still sit around the mid-100s in miles per hour. Individual swings could go even higher. That is serious speed. Golf Digest once summarized the contradiction perfectly by asking how someone could hit the ball around 300 yards while looking as though he were barely using one hand. The answer begins with an important distinction. Tempo is not the same thing as speed. A golfer can have a smooth tempo and still accelerate the club extremely quickly. Tempo describes the rhythm of the motion, how long the backswing takes, how naturally the downswing follows, whether the transition appears rushed. Clubhead speed describes what eventually happens to the club. Couples separated those two things beautifully. The overall swing looked calm, but inside that calm rhythm, several body parts were accelerating very quickly. That is why trying to copy only the visible pace can be misleading. Take the club back slowly, move down slowly, keep everything gentle. Do that literally, and the ball does not travel 300 yards. There has to be acceleration somewhere. With Couples, the remarkable part was how well he concealed it. There was no violent snatch from the top, no sudden attempt to manufacture speed with the hands. The motion simply gathered speed, and by the time the club reached the ball, it was moving very fast. That is the first secret behind the effortless appearance. Fred Couples did not generate distance by swinging slowly. He generated enormous speed without making the swing look fast. But that only moves the mystery somewhere else, because if the club head was traveling that quickly, you would expect Couples to be holding on for dear life. Instead, his hands sometimes looked almost absurdly relaxed. One of the most distinctive features of Couples' swing was the lack of visible tension through his hands and forearms. For most golfers, that becomes harder as the swing gets faster. Imagine holding a driver, then imagine someone telling you to swing it as hard as possible. There is a natural reaction. You squeeze, the fingers tighten around the grip, the forearms become rigid, the shoulders can tense, and suddenly the entire upper body begins preparing for impact, as if it has to physically force the club into the ball. Under pressure, that reaction becomes even stronger. There is trouble on the left, water on the right. You need a good drive. The grip becomes tighter without you even noticing. Couples often looked like the opposite. His arms appeared loose, his wrists remained mobile, and through impact, the trail hand could become so passive that it sometimes appeared to partially lose contact with the club. That is an extraordinary image. The driver is moving at more than 100 miles per hour. The forces on the grip are enormous, yet one of the player's hands looks almost as though it is trying to get out of the way. Modern biomechanical work helps explain why this is not necessarily as strange as it looks. The club does not need to be strangled through impact. Once the body, arms, and hands have created speed, excessive grip tension can interfere with the natural release of the club head. That does not mean the club should be held so loosely that it becomes unstable. Couples was not casually balancing the grip in his fingertips. He still had control, but there is a difference between secure pressure and unnecessary tension. That difference matters because the golf club is not a rigid extension of the arms. It is a rotating object. The club head needs to accelerate around the golfer. The wrists change angles, the arms rotate, the club releases. If the golfer tries to control every degree of that motion consciously with tight forearms and hands, the release can become restricted. Couples had spent a lifetime developing almost the opposite sensation, Let the motion happen. Golf Digest noted how loose he could become through impact. Couples himself had an extremely simple description of the swing he learned as a youngster. The faster he could get his hands around toward his left shoulder, the farther the ball went. That sounds very different from trying to carefully steer the club face through impact. He was releasing it, and the soft-looking hands allowed that release to happen without an obvious fight. But there is a trap here. It is easy to watch couples and decide that the light grip itself created the speed. That is not really what was happening. Relaxation did not manufacture power from nothing. It simply avoided interfering with power that had already been created elsewhere. And that leaves another question. If his hands were not aggressively controlling the club, what was? If you enjoy these deeper stories behind famous golf swings, make sure to subscribe. It supports the channel a lot and helps me keep making more videos like this. There was another detail that made Fred Couples look even more unusual. He almost never wore a golf glove. For decades, the bare left hand became part of his image. Most professional golfers wear a glove for a straightforward reason: friction. A glove can make the club feel more secure, particularly with sweat, rain, or a fast swing. So when you combine Couples' enormous speed with relaxed-looking hands and no glove at all, it is tempting to connect everything. Maybe the bare hand gave him better feel. Maybe it forced him to grip more softly. Maybe this was another piece of the secret. The real story is much simpler. Couples grew up playing golf in Seattle. The weather was often wet, golf gloves cost money, and as a child he would ruin them quickly. His parents eventually stopped buying them, so he learned to play without one, and the habit stayed with him. Couples has said that he used a glove only on extremely rare occasions, once during a long driving event in very hot conditions, and another time during a British Open when rain made it almost impossible to hold the club. Otherwise, bare hands became normal. That matters because it separates myth from mechanism. Playing without a glove did not magically create his swing. The decision began for a completely ordinary reason. But after thousands upon thousands of golf shots, that direct connection with the grip became what felt natural. And that fits the larger Couples story. Much of his swing was developed intuitively. He was not a player built from dozens of mechanical positions. As a youngster, he learned to hit the ball by playing. He competed with older golfers. He wanted more distance. He experimented until he discovered movements that allowed him to create it. Eventually, the sensation of the club moving freely became deeply familiar. The bare hand became a visible symbol of that feel. But copying it would accomplish very little by itself. Take your glove off tomorrow, and you do not become Fred Couples. In fact, if your grips are worn or your hands are sweaty, you might simply spend the round worrying about the club slipping. The important part was not the absence of lever between his hand and the grip. It was how comfortable Couples had become with the club moving at speed, without needing to squeeze it into submission. That is why the no-glove story matters. Not because it reveals a secret piece of equipment, because it shows how instinctive his relationship with the club had become. And once you stop looking at the glove, you can finally start looking at where the power was actually being produced. From the outside, Fred Couples' swing could look almost casual. Underneath that smooth rhythm, however, there was an enormous amount happening. Start with the backswing. Couples made a huge shoulder turn. Legendary instructor Harvey Pennick studied the motion and pointed out just how far the upper body rotated. The shoulders could turn well beyond what many golfers would consider a conventional 90 degrees. That creates travel. The club has more room to move. The torso stores rotation, and the body develops a large separation between different segments. Couples also had exceptional flexibility. That allowed him to make this enormous turn while maintaining a remarkably stable base. Then came the transition. This is where the illusion of laziness becomes particularly deceptive. The swing does not simply drift back toward the ball. His lower body begins changing direction. Rotation develops. The arms accelerate. The club starts gathering speed. And all of this happens without destroying the rhythm established on the way back. That is an important distinction. Smooth does not mean passive. Couples was an excellent athlete. Golf Digest described his build as closer to a running back than the stereotypical image of a delicate golfer. Strong legs created a stable base. The body rotated aggressively. The arms traveled quickly. Then came the release. Pennick paid particular attention to how Couples' right arm worked through the hitting area. The motion was free, fast, and committed. There was no attempt to hold everything in place through impact. The club was allowed to move. This is where the relaxed hands finally make sense. Imagine trying to crack a whip while keeping your entire arm rigid. You can move the whip, but the sequence is inefficient. Now allow movement to transfer from one segment to the next. the energy travels. Golf swings are much more complicated than that simple analogy, but the underlying idea helps. Couples' hands were not the primary engine. The body had already created motion. The arms had already created speed. By impact, the job of the hands was not to suddenly produce everything from scratch. They needed to participate in the release without choking it. That is why focusing exclusively on grip pressure misses most of the story. Couples could keep his hands relaxed because the rest of the swing was doing an enormous amount of work. Huge turn, athletic lower body, fast rotation, quick arms, then a free release through the ball. When you watch only the tempo, much of this disappears. The swing looks easy. When you break down the actual movements, it is anything but lazy. Couples was relaxed, but he was still moving very fast. And that difference becomes crucial when ordinary golfers try to copy him. If you want more stories like this, check out the playlist in the description or on the end screen. Because this is where the Fred Couples lesson can easily become bad advice. A golfer watches a few slow-motion swings. The hands look soft, the right hand almost comes away from the club. Couples does not wear a glove. The conclusion seems obvious. Hold the club as lightly as possible, then swing smoothly. Instant, effortless power. Unfortunately, golf does not work that way. Grip pressure still has a job. The club needs to remain stable. The face needs to return predictably, and the player has to manage enormous forces during the downswing. If the grip becomes so loose that the club moves independently inside the hands, consistency disappears. That was not what Couples was doing. His grip was secure. The lack of tension came from everything surrounding that security. He did not need to squeeze harder simply because he wanted the ball to travel farther. And this may be the useful lesson for ordinary golfers. Think about what often happens when someone wants an extra 15 yards. The backswing gets faster, the transition becomes violent, the hands tighten, the shoulders rise, the arms become stiff. The golfer feels as though enormous effort is being produced. But effort and speed are not always the same thing. Some of that tension can prevent the body from moving naturally. It can restrict wrist motion. It can interfere with the release. It can destroy the rhythm that allowed the player to strike the center of the face in the first place. Fred Couples represented the opposite extreme. The swing contained enormous athletic movement, but visually, very little tension escaped to the surface. That is what golfers should notice. Not the exact position of his right hand, not the absence of a glove, not even the enormous shoulder turn, which requires flexibility many players simply do not have. The transferable idea is much simpler. Do not confuse control with tension. You need enough pressure to control the golf club. You do not need to strangle it. You need speed. You do not necessarily need to look violent while creating it. And there is one final irony in describing Couples' motion as some kind of perfect body-saving swing. Fred suffered from serious back problems through much of his career. Those issues became severe enough to limit his tournament schedule and practice. So it would be misleading to claim that his relaxed hands somehow protected his back from the forces of golf. His motion was still highly athletic. The enormous turn and powerful release belonged to a body capable of producing them. What made Couples special was not that he had discovered a way to swing with no physical stress. It was that he could perform an extremely dynamic motion without allowing it to look tense. That is a very different lesson. The secret was never simply a light grip, and it certainly was not playing without a glove. Those were only the visible clues. The real pattern was underneath. Build speed with the body. Allow the arms to accelerate. Keep enough pressure to control the club. Then avoid adding tension simply because impact is approaching. Fred Couples made 300-yard power look like a casual afternoon swing because he understood something most golfers struggle with. Trying harder does not always make the club move faster. Sometimes the harder part is learning what not to tighten.